The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Voss Tower, a needle of glass and steel that pierced the city skyline like a monument to modern ambition. Tonight, every window blazed with golden light, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted down toward the streets far below, where ordinary people walked through ordinary lives, never suspecting what gathered above them. Lucien Voss stood at the center of it all, champagne flute in hand, a practiced smile on his face that had been perfected across 8 centuries of survival. He wore a tailored black suit that cost more than most people's yearly salaries, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that appeared to be somewhere in his late 30s, a face that had looked exactly the same since the year 1136. 888 years. He had stopped counting the birthdays somewhere around the 4th century, but his kind insisted on celebrations. The vampires needed their rituals, their traditions, their reasons to gather and affirm the old hierarchies. So every year, Lucien played the role of the vampire king, accepting the tributes and the empty flattery while his guests drank champagne that tasted like ash on his ancient tongue. The penthouse was filled with the powerful and the beautiful, tech moguls, media executives, fashion designers, and influencers with millions of followers who posted carefully curated glimpses of the party without ever understanding what they were truly witnessing. Among the human guests moved others, creatures of shadow and moonlight who wore their human masks with practiced ease. Lucien could identify each of them without effort, the old ones by their stillness between movements, the young ones by their barely contained hunger. "Your Majesty," a voice purred beside him, and Lucien turned to find Marcella, one of his oldest advisors, her crimson dress catching the light like spilled wine. 888 years. Quite the milestone. Have you made a wish? "I stopped wishing centuries ago," Lucien replied, his voice carrying the faint accent of a dozen dead languages blended together. "Wishes are for those who believe tomorrow will be different from today." Marcella laughed, a crystalline sound that had once enchanted kings and condemned armies. So cynical, and here I thought immortality was supposed to be a gift. Lucien said nothing. He watched the crowd move and mingle, watched the subtle dance of predators pretending to be human, and felt the familiar emptiness that had become his constant companion. He had seen empires crumble to dust. He had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves against an eternal shore. He had loved and lost and learned, eventually, to feel nothing at all. It was safer that way. The music shifted to something modern and pulsing, and Lucien excused himself from Marcella's attention, drifting toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Below, a river of headlights flowed through the streets, each one carrying a human life filled with hopes and fears and small daily struggles that would end in a handful of decades. He remembered, dimly, what it felt like to be one of them. The memory was like a faded painting, colors bleeding into abstraction. That was when he first noticed her. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, carrying a silver tray of empty glasses. Her uniform was black velvet, form-fitting and practical, marking her as one of the serving staff hired for the evening. But there was something about the way she moved, careful, watchful, deliberately invisible, that caught his attention. Silver piercings glinted at her ears and nose, and her lips were painted the color of dried roses. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple arrangement that somehow looked more elegant than the elaborate styles worn by the socialites around her. She couldn't have been more than 25, and everything about her aesthetic screamed Gothic subculture. The pale makeup, the dark clothes, the quiet rebellion against conventional brightness. She was utterly unremarkable to everyone else in the room. The powerful guests looked through her as if she were furniture, a convenient fixture designed to keep their glasses full and their needs met. Even the vampires paid her no attention, their predatory instincts apparently finding nothing of interest in her quiet presence. But Lucien watched. He watched as she navigated the crowd with practiced efficiency, collecting discarded glasses and replacing them with fresh champagne. He watched as she kept her eyes lowered, her expression carefully neutral, her entire being radiating the message that she was no one worth noticing. It was a performance. Lucien recognized it immediately because he had been performing for 888 years. something about her was wrong. Not wrong in a dangerous way, but wrong in the sense that she didn't fit. She was too aware, too deliberate, too careful in her invisibility. And beneath the carefully constructed anonymity, he sensed something he hadn't encountered in a very long time. Fear. Not the casual nervousness of someone working a prestigious event. This was deeper, older, the kind of fear that lived in the bones and colored every decision. She was afraid of something specific, and whatever it was, she believed it was here, in this room, surrounded by champagne and laughter and the glittering masks of the powerful. Lucian should have looked away. He should have returned to his guests and his empty congratulations and his endless performance of kingship. Whatever troubled this girl was not his concern. He had not survived 8 centuries by involving himself in the problems of mortals. But he didn't look away. Perhaps it was the weight of 888 years pressing down on him, the accumulated exhaustion of watching the world spin without ever feeling part of it. Perhaps it was some ghost of the young man he had once been, the one who had believed in justice and protection and the responsibility of the strong toward the weak. Perhaps he was simply bored, and this small mystery offered something his jaded existence had long lacked. Whatever the reason, Lucian found himself drifting through the crowd, following the girl with the silver tray as she moved toward the service corridor at the edge of the penthouse. She disappeared through a door marked staff only, and Lucian, the vampire king, host of this elaborate celebration, followed her without a word to his guests. The service corridor was narrow and functional, a stark contrast to the opulence of the main floor. Industrial lighting hummed overhead, and the walls were bare concrete, revealing the building's bones beneath its glamorous skin. The girl was standing at a small window at the end of the corridor, her silver tray set aside, her forehead pressed against the cold glass as she stared out at the night. She didn't hear him approach. Lucian moved with the silence of centuries, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, careful not to startle. "You're not really here to serve champagne, are you?" She spun around, and he saw her fear spike into something close to panic before she forced it down, replacing it with a carefully blank expression. Up close, she was younger than he had estimated, her face still carrying the softness of barely left adolescence despite the dark makeup. And her eyes, dark brown, almost black in the corridor's harsh light, held a depth of weariness that didn't belong in someone so young. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I was just taking a break. I'm sorry, I'll get back to—" "You've been avoiding the east side of the room all evening," Lucian interrupted gently. "Every time someone in a red tie approaches, you find a reason to be elsewhere. And you've been watching the emergency exits like you're planning an escape route." Her face went pale beneath the powder. For a moment, she said nothing, and Lucian could hear her heart racing, a rapid drumbeat of fear that any vampire in the building could have detected if they had bothered to pay attention. "Who are you?" she finally whispered. "Lucian Voss. This is my building, my party, my responsibility." He paused, letting the words settle. "And you are someone in trouble, I think. Someone who came here tonight looking for something or hiding from something. Which is it?" She stared at him, and he watched the calculation behind her eyes, the weighing of risks, the desperate search for a safe answer. He had seen that look countless times across the centuries, in the faces of refugees and fugitives and those who had learned that trust could be fatal. "Both," she finally said, the single word cracking like a dam under pressure. Lucian waited. She took a shaking breath. "My name is Elena Mirova, and I need your help, Mr. Voss. I know what you are. I know what most of the people at this party really are. And I know that what I'm about to tell you might get me killed, but I don't have anywhere else to go." In 888 years, very few things had surprised Lucian Voss. But standing in that concrete corridor, watching this frightened young woman gather the courage to trust a monster, he felt something stir in his chest that he had long believed dead. Curiosity, and something else, something that felt almost like the ghost of compassion. "Tell me," he said. And Elena Mirova, Gothic maid and accidental witness to things she should never have seen, leaned close and whispered words that changed everything. "There's a child," she breathed, her voice barely audible. A little girl. They're keeping her in a warehouse on the east side. The men in the red ties, they're part of a group that trades in people, in children. I used to work at a cleaning company that serviced their building, and I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. I've been running for 3 weeks, trying to find someone who could help, someone with enough power to actually do something. And then I heard rumors about this party, about the people who would be here, and I thought. She trailed off, her composure finally cracking, tears cutting tracks through her dark makeup. I thought if even half the stories were true, maybe there would be someone here who still remembered what it meant to protect the innocent. Lucian was very still. The men in red ties, he knew exactly who they were. Minor players in the criminal underworld, humans who had somehow stumbled into the orbit of certain supernatural factions and believed themselves untouchable. They were not his concern. The vampire world operated by different rules, and mortal crimes were left to mortal authorities. That was the law. That was how Lucian had survived for nearly 9 centuries, by drawing clear lines and never crossing them. But the lines felt very thin tonight, thinner than they had ever felt before. "This child," he said slowly, "what do you know about her?" "Her name is Sophie. She's 7 years old. They took her from her mother 3 days ago, and they're planning to move her tomorrow night. I don't know where. I don't know to whom. I just know that if someone doesn't help her, she'll disappear into a world that no child should ever see." Elena's voice broke on the last words, and Lucian saw in her eyes the same thing he had seen so many times across the centuries. The desperate hope of someone who had nowhere else to turn, placing their faith in a stranger because faith was all they had left. He should have walked away. He should have told her to go to the police, to the FBI, to any of the mortal authorities better equipped to handle mortal crimes. He should have maintained the careful neutrality that had kept him safe for 888 years. But somewhere in the depths of his ancient heart, something was waking up, something dangerous. Not hunger, not rage, not any of the dark impulses that his kind were known for. Something far more forbidden among the immortal, the desire to help. "Wait here," Lucian said quietly. "Do not leave this corridor. Do not speak to anyone. I will return within the hour." Elena's eyes widened. "You're going to help. You believe me." "I believe you," Lucian said. "And I'm going to make a decision tonight that may cost me more than you can imagine, but some costs are worth paying." He turned and walked back toward the party, his mind already working through the implications of what he was about to do. The men in red ties worked for a vampire named Cassius, a young and ambitious creature who had been pushing the boundaries of acceptable conduct for decades. Interfering with Cassius's operations would create political complications that could take years to untangle. Lucian found that he didn't care. For 888 years, he had preserved his power by making careful choices, by never risking his position for anything as fragile as principle. He had watched injustice unfold countless times and told himself that it wasn't his place to interfere, that mortals must solve their own problems. That compassion was a weakness the immortal could not afford. Tonight, he chose differently. The next 2 hours unfolded with quiet efficiency. Lucian made 3 phone calls to people who owed him favors measured in centuries. He had a brief conversation with Marcella that left her pale and silent, a reminder that even among vampires, a king's word was law. He dispatched 2 of his most trusted guards to a warehouse on the east side, with explicit instructions that no harm was to come to anyone, supernatural or human, but that a child named Sophie was to be brought to safety before dawn. By midnight, the party was winding down. The human guests departed in their limousines, already composing social media posts about the exclusive gathering they had attended. The vampires lingered longer, sensing that something had shifted in their king's demeanor, but none were brave enough to ask questions. At 2 a.m., Lucian received a message. The child was safe. He found Elena still waiting in the service corridor, her face streaked with dried tears, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. When he told her the news, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, trembling, as if she couldn't quite believe that the nightmare was over. "Sophie is being taken to a hospital for evaluation," Lucian said gently. My people have ensured that the proper authorities are involved, the real authorities, the ones who cannot be bought. Her mother has been contacted. The men who took her are facing questions they will not be able to answer. And what about you? Elena whispered. What will this cost you? Lucian considered the question. The political repercussions would be significant. Cassius would demand explanations, and other vampires would wonder why their king had involved himself in mortal affairs. There would be meetings and negotiations, and the careful rebuilding of alliances that his actions tonight had strained. Nothing I cannot afford, he said. It was almost the truth. Elena looked at him for a long moment, and then did something that no one had done in centuries. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm against his cold skin, a small point of human contact that felt more significant than any tribute he had ever received. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know why you helped. I don't know what made you decide to care about one little girl when you could have ignored everything I said. But thank you. Lucian didn't have an answer for her. He wasn't sure himself why he had chosen to act, why tonight of all nights the walls around his heart had cracked enough to let something through. Perhaps it was the weight of 888 years demanding to be lifted. Perhaps it was Elena herself, her quiet courage in walking into a room full of monsters with nothing but hope and desperation. Perhaps it was simply that he had grown tired, finally and completely tired, of being the king who protected only himself. Sometimes, he said slowly, finding the words as he spoke them, the desire to help is not something we choose. It is something that chooses us. And when it does, we can either honor it or spend the rest of our existence wondering what might have been. Elena smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her, and for a moment she looked less like a frightened girl and more like someone who might, someday, be whole again. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest. There is a guest suite on the 45th floor where you will be safe until morning. After that, we will discuss how to ensure that you remain safe permanently. The people you ran from will not trouble you again, that much I can promise. She nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. One of Lucian's staff appeared to escort her to the guest suite, and Elena paused at the corridor door, looking back. Happy birthday, Mr. Voss, she said quietly. I hope the next 888 years are kinder than the last. Then she was gone, and Lucian was alone with the hum of the building and the distant glow of the city below. He returned to the main floor, now empty except for the aftermath of celebration, overturned glasses, wilting flowers, the debris of revelry. He walked to the windows and looked out at the pre-dawn sky, where the first hints of gray were beginning to soften the darkness. For the first time in centuries, he didn't feel empty. The feeling was small, fragile, easily dismissed as sentiment or foolishness. But it was there, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with blood or hunger, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. He had protected someone tonight. Not for power, not for politics, not for any of the calculations that had governed his existence for 888 years. He had protected someone simply because she had needed protection, and because he had remembered, finally, what it meant to be more than a monster. 3 days later, Lucian received a letter. It was handwritten on simple paper, the penmanship careful and slightly uneven, the words of a child learning to express gratitude. Dear Mr. Voss, thank you for saving me. The nice lady said you helped find me when I was lost. My mom says you are a hero. I drew you a picture of a cat because cats are brave and quiet like heroes should be. Love. Sophie. Enclosed was a crayon drawing of a black cat with yellow eyes, sitting beneath a sky full of stars. Lucian placed the letter in his desk, alongside the few possessions he had carried through the centuries. A faded photograph of a woman who had died 400 years ago, a pressed flower from a garden that no longer existed, a small wooden cross that had belonged to his human mother. These were the things that mattered. These were the things that reminded him why immortality was worth enduring, not the power, not the wealth, not the endless accumulation of years. Connection, compassion, the quiet courage to protect those who could not protect themselves. Elena visited him once more, a week after the party, to say goodbye before she left the city for a new life somewhere safer. She looked different without the dark makeup and the uniform of invisibility, younger, softer, cautiously hopeful. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him. "About the desire to help choosing us. I think maybe that's what happened to me too. I could have ignored what I saw in that warehouse. I could have walked away and pretended it wasn't my problem, but something wouldn't let me." "That something has a name," Lucian said. "Conscience. It is rarer than you might think and more valuable." Elena smiled. "Will you be all right with your people?" "I have been managing my people for a very long time. They will adapt to the reminder that their king has not forgotten how to act according to principle rather than convenience." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in black tissue paper. "I wanted to give you something. It's not much, I don't have much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside the package was a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon, simple and elegant, the kind of thing sold in Gothic shops for young people who found beauty in darkness. "It's silly," Elena said, her cheeks flushing. "But when I was little, my grandmother used to tell me that the moon was a guardian, always watching, always there, even when you couldn't see it. You reminded me of that, a guardian in the darkness." Lucian turned the pendant over in his hands, feeling its weight, its warmth from being carried close to Elena's body. He had received gifts beyond counting in his long existence, jewels worth fortunes, ancient artifacts, tributes of gold and land and lives. None of them had meant anything. This small piece of silver, given by a frightened girl who had nothing else to offer, meant everything. "Thank you," he said, and the words carried more sincerity than any he had spoken in centuries. Elena left that evening, disappearing into a new life with new possibilities, carrying with her the knowledge that even in a world full of monsters, some monsters chose to be something more. And Lucian Voss, Vampire King, 888 years old and counting, hung a small silver moon in his window and watched the city below, feeling something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The next year, and the year after that, and the years that followed, he would make different choices. Not always dramatic ones. Not every night brought a child in need of rescue or a frightened witness in need of sanctuary. But in small ways, in quiet decisions, he began to remember what it meant to protect rather than simply survive. He established a foundation, human-run but funded by his endless resources, dedicated to finding and helping children who had fallen through the cracks of society. He used his influence among the supernatural to push back against those who preyed on the vulnerable. He became known, gradually, as something more than a political figure, a king who remembered that true power lay not in domination, but in guardianship. And every year, on his birthday, he received a card from Sophie. The drawings improved as she grew older. The cats became more detailed, then were replaced by horses, then by abstract designs as she discovered her own artistic voice. But the message was always the same. "Thank you for being a hero." Lucian kept every card. They reminded him, when the weight of centuries pressed down and the temptation to retreat into emptiness grew strong, that one choice could change everything. One moment of courage, one decision to protect instead of ignore, one whisper in the darkness answered with action rather than indifference. That was the gift Elena Mirova had given him, far more valuable than any silver pendant. She had reminded the Vampire King that the most dangerous desire was not hunger or ambition or the dark impulses of his nature. It was the desire to be good. And that desire, once awakened, could never be silenced again.